We're talking Oregon Ducks football on the Ourlads Football Network here on the Ourlads Football YouTube channel. I'm Greg DePalma, and if we're talking Oregon Ducks football, that means Rob Moseley's back from GoDucks.com. How's it going, Rob?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. So we get this opportunity to talk at least once a year, which is awesome. And hopefully we'll talk more than that because this looks like it could be another exciting year for the program, especially because Oregon is headed to the mighty Big Ten. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a year of transition for sure. Actually, tomorrow we have our soccer opener, and that's our first official Big Ten game. So it's pretty exciting. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. I was actually in Paris for the Olympics for the last couple of weeks. So like on August 2nd, when everything became official, I was out of the country. So it's a little strange to be kind of watching it all from afar after all the groundwork we've laid the last several months. But yeah, exciting time, different time. Obviously, for all of college athletics, it's obviously a really dynamic time where things are just changing. Things seem just really fluid, not constantly. So, but for right now, yeah, a really exciting time, and the sense of at least the future for the next couple years with the playoff format changing and all that. There at least a little bit of stability, but you never take anything for granted either. Again, with how dynamic the environment is these days.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. Eventually, I guess we're going to get to some sort of like NFL look. Which I don't know how, but it'll get there. And when it happens, it's going to really change the landscape. So, but for now, we had a playoff for the first time. And that means that if you're associated with one of these big conferences and you lose a second game, if you're a really good football team, you're probably going to find a way back, to sneak into those playoffs. And Oregon, one of those teams coming from the Pac-12, this is an extra benefit, as we know, because a lot of times you lose one game in the Pac-12 and, you're not getting to a 14 playoff. That's for sure. Now it's 12. That's a different story. So I'm sure the fans must be really pumped for that, as well as the opportunity to play some new football teams.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of, cautious optimism about the quality of this Oregon team. That regardless of the format, this was a team that could be a factor, even under the previous circumstances. But I think you're absolutely right that in the past, particularly coming from the Pac-12 and the reputation the league had nationally, it did often feel like if you lost one game, you were in a lot of trouble, and you weren't given the benefit of the doubt that some other leagues were, rightly or wrongly. That was just the truth, and so. Going to the Big Ten, which obviously has a different profile, and then under this new format, as you say, kind of that 1-2 punch of circumstances. I think that landscape has changed a lot. But again, I think you look at the quality, the depth of talent that this team has, and there is some hope that kind of none of that other stuff matters. That this is that it's going to feel like it has a really good chance in every game it plays, despite going against some really, really quality competition, and you respect so many of those teams and know that you can't take anything for granted. But you just look at preseason rankings. I think they bear out that this is an Oregon team that is right there in the mix with the best of the best across the country.
And the schedule definitely is. First year and coming from a Pac-12 schedule to boot, it's pretty tough. Not only does that Ohio State game pop up on October 12th, even though it's a home game, Oregon does have to play the defending national champs pretty much the next month on the road, play Wisconsin on the road, the Civil War's on the road, and then also an interesting second game of the season to open up with a quality Boise State team. So, and I didn't even mention a few others. So this is a tough schedule.
Yeah, I think, you look no further than that Boise game. There's a lot of scars around Eugene from some past matchups with Boise. It's just been a team that has really given Oregon trouble throughout the years, kind of regardless of who was coaching either side. You go back to some games, 2008, 2009, some bowl matchups. Just has really presented a lot of problems. So, but I think everybody in Eugene has that Ohio State game scheduled. They were supposed to play out here in 2020 because of COVID. That trip didn't happen. Kind of the irony of it is we had wildfires here that week, and I don't think we would have been able to play that here anyway, even if COVID hadn't been going on. But people have been long anticipating that game. It didn't happen. Now Ohio State, through much different circumstances, is back on the schedule in a way nobody, I think, really saw coming, that it would be a conference matchup.
Yeah.
But for all the sense of excitement, anticipation that can exist for does exist for some other games, I think a lot of Eugene and Oregon fans everywhere have that Ohio State game circled on their calendars.
Yeah, matter of fact, I was just looking at it. Says Oregon has never beaten Boise State. They're 0-3. So that's, how strange is that?
I bet if you asked an Oregon fan, they'd say it's probably more like 0-10, 0-12, something like
that's
that.
how it feels. Yeah.
That I didn't even know that. So it's 08, 09, and then the Vegas Bowl, and what, 17?
Yeah, 17. Yeah.
Yeah, I have those scars too, apparently, because I would have thought it was even more than that. But yeah, the 2008 game, Jeremiah Moseley gets knocked out of that game, gets injured. 2009 game is, Chip Kelly's first game as head coach, the LeGarrette Blount punch in Boise. And then, the 2017 game. So that would have been when Willie Taggart coached that year, but then left before the bowl game. Mario Cristobal took over. You're in Vegas, which is a tough circumstance to handle sometimes. So yeah, that was all three of them are quite memorable in their own ways.
And this one could be as well. Boise State's got a good football team, it looks like, and they got a heck of a running back. So that should be a nice matchup for the first FBS game this season for Oregon. Oregon State getting them the very next week. And I know, of course, because of COVID, they were able to play, they did play Oregon State early on their schedule, but that's not normal. To have Oregon State play this early, I guess that's the new norm, that they're not in the same conference. Is that
right?
Is that rivalry going to stay? Is that possible?
I think there's a lot of desire on all fronts to sustain that. Yeah, I don't know what exactly all the contracts look like right now, but I think there's a deep desire throughout the state to see that rivalry continue in whatever format it needs to exist in. But yeah, I think Oregon State wants to.
That's good.
Kind of neutral parties want to see it happen for obvious reasons, just given the tradition of it and what it means to people around the state. So yeah, I certainly anticipate it being played, every year that it can work. Obviously with football schedules these days, their games are scheduled so far out. And then Oregon State's future, obviously pretty uncertain right now, once you look beyond the next couple of years. So, you don't take anything for granted there. But I think, there's certainly desire on all fronts to sustain that for as long as possible, as often as possible.
All right, let's take a look at the latest depth chart Ourlads has for Oregon. And it's not easy to have a precise depth chart in college, but we do our best. And let's start on offense because the Ducks have a new quarterback. Of course, they had themselves a really good one for the last few years. First-round draft pick Bo Nix. So now Dylan Gabriel comes to the rescue to temporarily give them an extra year to hopefully give Dante Moore some more experience so he can take over for the next couple of years. I'm assuming that's the goal. What have you seen so far from Gabriel, and compare Gabriel to Nix, and whether or not you think there's going to be any difference the way the offense is run?
Yeah, well, so far, and again, I was in Paris until Friday, so I got back, covered a scrimmage on Saturday, and practices the last couple of days. So I haven't watched a ton of this preseason camp, but reflecting back on spring drills this year, the build up to this season for Gabriel reminds me a lot right now of Bo Nix's first year, 2022 here in Eugene, in that they both showed up for spring and were both very comfortable. I think there's probably some confidence on both of their parts, knowing what their resumes looked like at the college level before they got to Oregon. In both cases, they've accomplished quite a lot. I think probably felt pretty confident in their skills and what role they could and should play on the team once things once you went through all your spring camp and your preseason practices. But both of them, from my perspective, from the sideline, were quite comfortable in the spring to just kind of be considered in the mix. They weren't handed anything. It's not like either one of them came in and was just handed all the number one reps right off the bat. It was, obviously every program wants to have competition at every position, and you don't want to just anoint people. Conventional wisdom, I think common sense even, suggested that Bo Nix was going to end up being a starter in 22. And I think, in 24, it's the same for Dillon Gabriel. But both of them, I think, again, were mature enough and confident enough to come in the spring and say, nope, I'll just be in the mix. I can share reps with some of these younger guys, help them get up to speed. I can make sure I'm comfortable, in the relationships with my new teammates, in learning a new system and operating a new system. And then what I've seen just in the last few days from Dillon Gabriel, again, as it was the case for Bo Nix in 22, is once you get to preseason camp, you come out of the summer into preseason camp, then you really start to see that experience, that veteran presence start to, potentially create some separation. So, still some time to go, but I think, certainly from the sideline, I'm starting to see, a guy who looks like he's played a ton of college football and is primed for the kind of season I think a lot of people expect. Dante Moore, he was a guy I think Oregon really wanted as a recruit, was probably his second choice when he went to UCLA. So it almost feels like he's home, he's where he belongs. But Austin Novosad's a guy who had a great spring. I mean, there were definitely days in the spring when Austin Novosad looked like the best of the group. Again, Dillon Gabriel's kind of getting up to speed. If there was a day when he didn't have his best day, that it was just as likely that Novosad might stand out from that group as Dante Moore. Again, as we get into preseason camp now, and again, I've only watched a handful of practices, but the fact that Dante Moore played a bunch for UCLA, started multiple games for UCLA last year, that's starting to show up a little bit too, So when you get into scrimmage situations, end of game situations, third down situations, you're starting to see kind of that experience pay off for Dante Moore. But I think Austin Novosad's a guy Oregon thinks has a really bright future. And, the pipeline then goes down to Luke Moga, who's a really athletic kid, runs like a deer, little bit of Mariota-like there. Doesn't necessarily strike you as the most explosive guy with his first step, but then, is at full speed within a couple strides and is tough to catch. So, for a quarterback depth chart around here that for the last couple of years at times has felt a little tenuous, suddenly that changed a ton with Novosad's development, the arrival of Dante Moore, the arrival of Gabriel, and now even having a scholarship guy in Moga as your number 4 guy.
Yeah, you would think that with all that experience Dillon had, because Nix, I think he left the program as the all-time most experienced quarterback in FBS history. So now you have another kid who might be on that level. So that really makes things a lot easier for the program to have that type of experience in back-to-back years. All right, so James takes over now as the number 1, I guess you could say the clear number 1, even though Whittington is somebody that has a lot of talent, and it kind of looks to me like the backfield should be fairly similar production-wise as it was last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bucky Irving's a guy who, did great things. He had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, which hasn't been done a ton around here. I think he's the only back in Oregon history with multiple 100-yard bowl game performances, which is kind of stands out given the talent that's of back that has played here. But I really was kind of one of the heart and soul guys of this program, on the field, off the field, in the locker room. So he, his presence is missed. He had a bit of a bigger personality than these other guys too. So Jordan James, really soft-spoken guy. Noah Whittington, really soft-spoken guy. But both really have been really productive. Jordan James last year, 2 years ago, he was kind of the short yardage guy. If you needed a touchdown inside the 5, he was the guy that got the call there. And he was really eager last year to prove that he was more than that he could be the kind of versatile, well-rounded back that a team would be looking for. And so when he got his opportunities, I think he showed that. And so I think he was really gratified to get those opportunities and to take advantage of them. I think it makes the fan base a lot more confident that you can lose a guy like Bucky Irving and still feel like you have somebody who was really productive last year. And they needed it because Whittington suffered a pretty serious injury. I think it was about a third of the way into last season. But he's looking like he's all the way back, and he's just a really explosive, kind of squirrely runner. I mean, he's one of those guys who you can run into traffic, and then you're not sure how, but suddenly he just squirts out the other side of the hole, and he's gone. Just finds a way with his vision and his balance and his power and just his elusiveness to he can take a small hole and turn it into a big one. Jay Harris is a transfer who came in. He's got a bigger frame, bigger profile. So, you'll wonder if, he ends up being kind of a short yardage guy. But, Jordan James is certainly a guy who's proven he could do that a couple years ago. And Jaden Lamar is a guy that this staff's really high on. I think they feel like he can do a lot of different things. He can catch the ball. He can play on special teams. I think what we as fans kind of think of as a third down type back that can kind of do some different things that way. I wonder if he'll get, looks in situations like that this year. Right. But, Jordan James certainly proved he could be an every down guy when he got that chance.
And by the way, so Harris, he was he an FCS back?
He was a D2 guy.
D2 guy. Okay.
If I remember right. Yeah.
All right. So highly productive, but at a lower level. So,
right.
We'll see how that translates. Okay. So again, it looks like a deep backfield. Wide receiver, Nix and his best buddy are gone. So the wide receiver room, though, still able to make some waves this offseason by bringing in Evan Stewart from Texas A&M. So Tez Johnson made a nice transition to Pac-12 football last year. So this you got a really good 1-2 punch there with Stewart and Johnson. How's the rest of the unit look?
Yeah, I mean, those are just two really explosive guys. And so, good guys to be kind of the foundation for the room. But Trayshawn Holden is a guy who's really impressed me this offseason. Transferred in last year and, wasn't as consistent. His hands weren't always as reliable as you'd like him to be. Obviously, from a receiver, you want to see a guy catch the ball. And his improvement, his consistency spring into preseason camp has just really improved. And he's a guy with a much bigger frame, bigger body, just profiles different than those other two guys who are kind of smaller, quicker guys. So a much different look that Holden that can provide. And he's has really impressed with the consistency of, his ability to make big plays. He looks quicker even at his size, and he's catching the ball more consistently. So, Gary Bryant's a guy who played a ton last year. And I think a guy there's every confidence that if you needed somebody else to plug into the starting lineup, he could do that. And Jurion Dickey was a highly rated recruit who had to lose some weight, get himself into better shape, and has done that. Okay. And so I think he's kind of on the path Jordan James was a couple of years ago, where he's eager to prove he can be the guy that, he can play up to the reputation that he brought here. And Kyler Casper, again, I've watched all three practices this preseason. So small sample size, but not many guys have jumped out more than Kyler Casper. Pardon me. In the week that I've been back watching, just really, really impressive. Looking like a guy who can be a factor as well. So, if you want to go at least 2 deep at receiver, and this group looks like it can certainly do that.
Who has the most upside on the bench?
Well, I suppose if you go by recruiting rankings, it's probably Dickey.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm telling this person to stop calling me while we're in the middle of this. Yeah, probably Dickey based on recruiting rankings. Okay. I mean, Evan Stewart's a guy who obviously has proven himself a little bit, but for Oregon fans is a new face. And I mean, again, he seems like a guy who the sky's the limit. So I think Oregon fans are eager to see him kind of play up to his reputation in an Oregon uniform this fall.
But according to you, because of what you've seen, it could be Casper. that is that one guy that actually could make a jump. So maybe Casper and Dickey are the ones that.
Yeah, I think those are two different questions. Who has the highest upside? Who has the highest ceiling? I don't know if Casper has the highest ceiling of any of those guys. Who has the chance to make the biggest jump over where they were a year ago? Different question, but yeah, that could be a guy where Casper fits that bill.
Okay. And then we take a look at first of all, the tight end position. Ferguson, productive last year. He's going to be the main guy there this year. What do you expect from Ferguson?
Oh yeah, I mean one of the better tight ends in the country. I mean I think he's earned that right. I mean he's that athletic. He's got that much experience. Just a really good player. But kind of as is the theme as we talk through all these position groups, and I think credit to the recruiting that Dan Lanning and his staff have done, both at the high school level and then through the portal. There's just a lot of other options there. Patrick Herbert, Justin Herbert's younger brother, really made a jump last year. He's a guy, whereas Ferguson's kind of that stretch the field, maybe separate, you line up in the slot, pass catching tight end. Herbert has really embraced being that, tight to the tackle, line of scrimmage guy. He'll block for you, but then also got some opportunities to prove himself as a threat in the passing game last year and really took advantage of him. I mean, turned out to be a guy who could take a short pass and turn it into a big gain. I mean, he was that athletic. So provided another option there. And then Kenyon Sadiq, kind of along the lines with Casper, is another guy who really, really looks like he's ready to make the jump from, young guy with promise who might not get a lot of chances to is going to force himself into the conversation because he's a freak athlete, arguably one of the, best kind of size, strength, speed combinations on the whole team. And his productivity is starting to match his athletic profile. I think, and a guy I think is making noise this preseason, and I think another guy fans are really eager to see what he can do once games get going.
All right, and it all starts up front, of course, and it looks like they are in good shape with the bookends. You've got Connerly on one side, Cornelius on the other. They bring in Bedford, who had, I believe, somewhere close to 40 career starts playing for Indiana. So the line seems to be in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, those tackles are elite. Cornelius is getting first-team All-America, mentioned from some publications, some outlets. Connolly's a guy I think people look at as potentially a future first-round draft pick, whether it's after this year or next year. His ceiling's that high. Marcus Harper's played a ton of football. Bedford's played a ton of football. If those are your guards, you feel really good about that. This team did lose the Remington Trophy winner, the best center in the country, in Jackson Powers Johnson, who's a rookie with the Raiders now. So Pancho Lalaulu is a guy who really opened eyes last year and played kind of beyond his years as a young guy, but is potentially is being asked to take on a much bigger role now and fill some huge shoes. The best center in the country. So. For experience tells me that anytime you have to replace a really good center, you can't really take anything for granted. As good as the other pieces might be, you need to build up that chemistry. You need a guy who can reliably get the ball back to your quarterback. So, I think that's a position, everybody will be watching the first couple of games just to be sure that this kid who showed so much promise, can hold down that spot. Nobody expects him to necessarily be the next, the Remington Trophy winner again. Obviously that'd be great, but he certainly has the ability to be a guy who can be plugged into that spot and hold that position down. But it is going to be a different role for him. And so, that'll be something to watch, I think, the first couple games.
Okay, let's take a look at the defense for Oregon. And up front, Birch, he jumps off the screen for sure. He's going to be a big part of the pass rush and the defense in general. So besides Birch, what should the fans be keeping an eye on? I know Harmon comes over from Michigan State up front. So what's the defensive line going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you bring in guys with the track records of Harmon and Caldwell, you figure, they're going to play quite a bit. But I think this is a defense that doesn't want to have to rely on, the same guys every snap. They want to feel like, if you can get a guy 40 snaps per game and get a bunch of guys that are playing 40 snaps a game instead of 3 guys all playing 80 snaps a game, you're probably going to be better off. So, as folks look at that depth chart, yeah, Harmon and Caldwell and Birch jump out, but you look at guys like Amari Washington, who's another guy who had made a really big jump in the spring. You look at Keon Ware-Hudson, who's played a lot of football, is a really veteran guy at this point. And even some of those other guys lower on the depth chart, like Gardner and Gray and Breland, younger guys, maybe those guys aren't 40 snap guys, but they're, 15 snap guys too, to just try to kind of fill out the rotation that way too. I mean, I expect potentially, as long as guys prove they can handle those workloads, I expect potentially to see quite a lot of rotation on that defensive line. But yeah, I kind of like when Birch came in last year, as a portal guy from a big school who had played significantly. Caldwell and Harmon, come in with those reputations as well, and so far from what I'm seeing, much deserved. They look like guys who are going to be impact players on the D line.
And at linebacker, the 2 guys that stick out are Bassa and Jacobs. Bassa really made a big jump last year, a matter of fact, and Jacobs came over from where was he? Was he
Iowa?
Iowa.
Okay. Yeah.
So
he was banged up the first half of the year, but once he got healthy, him and Bassa are pretty formidable. And Bassa's just, you talk about a quarterback of the defense. That's Jeff Bassa. He's one of those guys we roll out for media days and things like that because he just handles himself with such maturity. I mean, you talk about a guy who cares and wants to be great and wants to be whatever his team needs. That's Jeff Bassa. So, he's a guy that I think you kind of build around. But sticking with the theme, there's depth there. Bryce Betcher's a guy who started some games last year. Eugene Kidd, played baseball as well. He was a Gold Glove winner as a center fielder in college baseball this past spring. Got drafted by the Houston Astros, but he's got one more year of football eligibility, and it was drafted low enough with the Astros that he could go enough and say to them, "Hey, I'm going to report to you next year, but I got one more chance to play football for my hometown program. I love playing football. I want to do it." So, and then Devin Jackson might be the fastest linebacker in all of college football, and is starting to look like he could put that speed to use. As kind of Dan Lanning and even Devin himself have said, you can have all speed in the world, but if you're going the wrong direction, it's no help. But he's starting to be a guy who's really starting to figure out kind of where to be, when to be on the field, put that speed to use. And I think Devin Jackson is a guy who I think, you hope to see a guy who can prove himself in some opportunities behind those more veteran guys this year and show that, next year, when you lose some of those guys, he can be a guy who can step right in there.
And there's a couple other guys listed here. Again, I don't know if that's going to be the case for Oregon as starters, but at least with the front guys. And that's is that kid related at all to the Clemson?
Mateo Uiagalelei? Yeah, that's his younger brother. Yeah, Mateo's DJ's younger brother. Yeah.
Okay. And then Winston as well.
Last year. Okay. Yeah, and Winston's a guy who's the younger brother of Lamar Winston, who played here a couple years ago. So some legacy guys there on the edges. Between those 2 guys, Tatum Tuioti and Blake Purchase, they were one of the really pleasant surprises last year. This team, had some question marks on the edge, and when you have to rely on that kind of youth on the edge, it can be a little scary. And those guys, again, no single one of them had too much put on his plate, for all of Uiagalelei's, accolades as a recruit. He played quite a bit, but again, those other guys were in the rotation with him. So it wasn't like he had to come in and, by definition, lead the team in sacks, anything like that. But, all those guys, and Tuioti and Purchase in particular, I think, because they didn't quite have the same recruiting credentials as Uiagalelei, were really pleasant surprises. And, if those guys can build on the experience they got last year, you look to this year and even next year, has a chance to be a really formidable group off on the edge.
So that would be Purchase, and how do you pronounce it? Tuioti?
Tuioti.
Tuioti.
Yeah, his dad is the defensive line coach here.
Okay, very nice. And then in the secondary, we've got some movement back here, some transfer movement. So there's some new faces, and that includes, well, Muhammad, of course, is the big marquee kid that comes over from Washington. You got Johnson coming over from Duke, and Savage at safety from K-State.
Yeah. So, and Cam Alexander's, a portal guy as well. So that's just been a position group the last couple of years where that's, it's the new normal at every position. It feels like for every team in college football. Yeah. But, the secondary at Oregon has just really done a great job in the portal year over year over year. Last year leading tackler was Evan Williams, who was a portal kid. His brother Bennett Williams, the year before that, portal kid. Kyrie Jackson, may he rest in peace. Tragic situation there before he could start his rookie year with the Vikings this year, but was such an impact player as a corner here. Before that, Christian Gonzalez, 1 year transfer at corner. I mean, it just the ability of this coaching staff to go out and identify guys in the portal that could be impact players in the secondary just leads you to think that that they're going to be able to plug some of these new faces in and have some success. And obviously with Jabbar Muhammad, I mean, his track record is phenomenal. It is what it is. Obviously very strange given the rivalry to bring in a guy from Washington, but it's not the first time that some transfers from Washington have come in to impact this defense, and just clearly a very, very solid player. But Kobe Savage is a guy that K-State transfer. Cam Alexander from San Antonio. Brandon Johnson from Duke is the new face. He wasn't here for the spring, unlike the other guys, but he's looking like he can a plug and play guy there. Assuming he gels with those other guys, like it looks like he's being able to do. One of the big question marks is Jalil Florence, who played a lot last year but was hurt late in the year and has been working his way back from injury this offseason. So, he's a guy who could be a factor at the corner spot opposite Muhammad potentially too. If he can get himself all the way back. Dante Manning, former 5-star recruit. Nico Reed, another kid who came over for the portal. Great kickoff returner, can play nickel, but can play some corner as well. He could be a factor there as well. And then really one of the stories of the spring game was some of the younger guys at safety. Solomon Davis had a great spring game. Aaron Flowers had a great spring game. Roderick Pleasant didn't play in the spring because he was running track for Oregon's track and field program, which obviously is quite storied. And he's hands down one of the fastest players of all of college football too. But he's starting to look like a guy who isn't just, kind of that cliche of a track guy playing football. He's starting to look like a football player who happens to have track speed too. So some options there as well. But yeah, those guys who come in with experience from the portal, again, given the track record here the last few years, you kind of expect them and their experience to put them kind of at the top of the depth chart to open the season at least.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of new faces, and these guys definitely have to first and foremost learn how to play together.
No doubt.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest deal. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But there's talent, a lot of talent. So
yes,
if they can get together and gel early before it gets out of hand as far as any key losses or anything like that, then it looks like they're going to be a really good defense later on in the season. So,
but it's just the new normal across college football and across all of college athletics. Yep. You're just, it really feels to me like kind of the way men's basketball has operated the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
That's every sport now where, you kind of have a new group most every year. And yeah, the challenge for the coaching staff is to recruit those guys, but then get them on the same page as fast as you possibly can, particularly at Oregon with Dana Altman and his program. I mean, we've been used to that, for a decade now.
Yeah.
Of liberal use of transfers. And again, needing some time early in the season to gel. And football, because of the nature of things, like we were talking right off the bat, where if you drop a game, certainly if you drop two, you're kind of out of the playoff. You don't have the luxury of taking very much time to get up to speed. But again, I think this defensive staff in particular has proven that, if they can bring in talented players, get them on the same page, and then keep things rolling year over year, even with a bunch of new faces.
Who would be considered your favorite breakout players, offensively and defensively, that you think could make the next step? Because you mentioned a bunch of guys, so who would be your favorites?
Yeah, well, let's start at defense, because you have the defense caught up right there. I think Amari Washington is a guy who, he's not going to, you don't expect an interior lineman to, get half a dozen sacks or pile up a bunch of tackles, but a guy who could be a rotation guy. I think Devin Jackson for sure is a guy who athletically is just a freak. And, if you're looking for who your third inside linebacker is going to be, there's some candidates there. Even Connor Solis played a bunch of football. And Betcher's played a bunch of football, and Mixon's got a year under his belt. But Jackson's a guy who looks like he could very, very easily be maybe that third guy in the rotation of inside linebacker. And given his talents, if he's a guy who, if he can get a hand on the ball, it's a potential pick six, something like that. So, in terms of younger guys who aren't as proven, those are some guys. Offensively, probably, just with the week he's had, Casper looks like he could be that guy. And then Sadiq at tight end. For a guy who hasn't played essentially at all, probably in the minds of most college football fans, a guy who we could be talking about in a much different way 3 or 4 months from now than we are right now.
All right. And how's special teams looking? Do you have an idea of how comfortable they feel with the kicking game?
Yeah, I think one of the other really cool stories of last season was Ross James, and obviously punter's not the sexiest position on any team, and you don't want to see your punter utilize that often. But Oregon went out and recruited a scholarship punter in Luke Dunn last year, and he's a big kid with a big leg who looks like he could have a bright future. But brought him in partly because Ross James the year before had been really, really inconsistent, and Ross James answered that challenge and won that job and was really, really good. I think he didn't have enough attempts to qualify, but I want to say if he had enough attempts to qualify, he might have had the best punting average in school history last year. So, that was really cool for him. So he should bring a lot of confidence into this year. And then Atticus Sappington, we talked about sort of the strangeness of bringing in a Washington transfer and Jabbar Muhammad. Sappington was kicking for Oregon State last year. His nickname around the state is Automaticus. His first name being Atticus. So, really, really proven guy as a place kicker. And Oregon lost Camden Lewis, who played a ton of football and scored a ton of points the last 5 years. But you lose a kicker with a ton of experience, then you can bring in a guy who's really proven in Sappington. That's really helpful. So, the tons of options to return kicks. Bryant returned kicks last year. Tez returned kicks. Noah Whittington wants to be that guy. Nico Reed, I think, has a ton of potential as a kick returner. Stewart can do it athletically. Pleasant, like I said, I think he's 99 speed on the new college football video game. So a lot of options there.
And Sappington was kicking for Oregon State last year.
Right.
Okay. That's kind of, he doesn't have to travel that far, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So. Nice. Well known around the state. He's just third game of the year might be a little odd for him.
Well, when you see some of these kids that like we just mentioned with Muhammad, yeah, it's a little strange. Washington, Oregon, it's happened before, but it makes more sense when you see Sappington and Muhammad making this transfer to Oregon, because Washington's going to go through some growing pains this year, you would think. And of course, same thing with Oregon State. You would think that's the only unfortunate thing about not having Jonathan Smith there. As a fan, you want to see Jonathan Smith stay at Oregon State. Because he did such a great job of rebuilding that program. And, you want to say the same thing about some other coaches like Jed Fish at Arizona. But you know what? It's business and they move on. You just hope the programs don't have to suffer too much. So,
I think I can speak on behalf of all Oregon fans in that they'll all be fine seeing Washington suffer just as much as possible. Obviously, there's some deep scars after last year because that was a really good Husky team, and Penix was, and that receiver group were just such a tough matchup for everybody across the country. But obviously, gave Oregon a lot of trouble both times they played. So, if they do take a step back, which you don't know for sure, I don't think anybody on Oregon's side.
No.
The stands at Autzen Stadium is going to be disappointed to see that. Oregon State is a much different story. I think there's a lot of folks around here. That's always kind of like your brother, where you have a rivalry, a family rivalry, but outside the family, you're rooting for them, and I don't think that's any different now. And obviously, the circumstances for them in Washington State have been really difficult the last few months. And I think knowing a lot of people personally that work in Corvallis, work in Pullman. You feel for a lot of the people involved, and you really hope that they can have as much success as possible when they're not playing the Ducks, because they're in a tough spot right now, and hopefully can come through it. I think the leadership at the Pac-12 is really, really competent, so they're in good hands that way. But it's a big challenge to overcome too, to kind of try to land on their feet. So I think as far as Oregon State's concerned, most folks in green and yellow are going to be rooting to see them come out of this in as good a situation as possible.
Was that solely because he understood what was going on with Oregon, with the conference, and where Oregon State was going to be? Is that
you're talking about Jonathan Smith?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have a great sense for that, but just watching from afar, that seems like sort of the common sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame.
But
I'm a New Jersey kid, and I had to go through that with Rutgers and Schiano, because he was trying really hard to push them into the Big Ten, and they had said, no, it's just not going to happen. And he goes, all right, well, I got this opportunity to go to the NFL. No, I'd rather stay here, but it's not going anywhere. I don't want to play football in the Big East. He goes to Tampa like 6 months later. Hey, we're going to the Big Ten.
Oh, wow.
Like, oh, no.
Yeah.
And that's what he says he regrets more than anything. And it took him that long to get back to Rutgers and to start building the team back to where they are, where it looks like they're going to be relative again. So it's been a whirlwind. But I completely understand how these coaches think, and they should. I mean, it's not his fault that Oregon State, the program, has been put in this situation. So
right.
And I'm sure everybody is thankful for what he did for the program anyway. They're not going to hold him any. I'm sure they're always going to have those wild cards, but for the most part,
I think they're, some of those wounds will take a little bit of time to heal, but they'll heal.
But he did a great job. Rob, what do you think, before I let you go, what do you think about your gut as far as this team? Do you think, because again, they look like a playoff team for sure, barring anything crazy with some, losses that they weren't expecting. So they're going to be there, or at least they should be. Do you think that they have the makeup to be a championship team yet?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I just think you look at the job Dan Lanning has done, and with the exception of those Washington games, which, again, were just a tough matchup. And, they gave pretty much everybody fits last year for good reason. This is a team that has looked like and even was in those games, and you just feel like you have a chance with anybody, against anybody at this point, kind of no matter who you're playing, no matter where you're at, you got a shot. You can't take anything for granted, and certainly injuries can happen. You run into an opponent like a Washington last year that just feels like they've caught lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Again, it can kind of, the sum felt like almost like more than the whole of its parts with that team, which is, you just got to tip your cap. It means it was a well-coached group, a well-led group that executed well. But this Oregon team, I think reasonably, you'll go into every game feeling like, Ducks have a good shot in this one, kind of whoever you're playing, wherever you're playing. And there aren't that many teams in the country that can say that. So, as somebody who went to school here and works here now, I appreciate that Oregon's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, do you think Lanning is, I know you never know, can never tell what's going to happen, but do you get the feeling that Lanning's going to be here for a while?
I certainly do. It's funny. I was just talking to somebody the other day. Like, I'm almost scared to put as much faith in him as I'm putting in him because of Willie Taggart and Mario Cristobal. And you certainly understood both those situations. If there was one job those guys would have left Oregon for, in both cases, it came open, and kind of like the Jonathan Smith situation. You couldn't begrudge them for taking the opportunity they did, but you get PTSD after a while, and so you start to feel like, hey, I don't want to put too much faith in anything, but it sure looks like, Rob Mullins, the athletic director here, hit a home run in the choice to bring in Dan Lanning. I think particularly a guy that, just the age he's at, that Lanning's at, and Marshall Malco, his chief of staff. This program could not have been in a better position to navigate these changing waters the last few years with the portal and NIL and all that. All of that stuff becoming factors. An older coach and older staff might have been slower to adapt.
Yeah, right.
I think, there's examples of that all across the country, across multiple different sports of older coaches that were a little slower to adapt to this changing landscape. And I think you just had, the right guys in the right positions at the right time to help Oregon really maximize its ability to get through this turbulent time and hopefully come out the other side whenever the next, stable environment finally emerges, if that ever happens.
Yeah.
I think Oregon's going to be one of those teams that it can feel like, hey, we got through that transition period as well as we possibly could have because the right people were in the right positions at the right time.
Yeah, now in the Big Ten, I mean, you're not going to say there's no excuse of going to a bigger conference, and Oregon at this point, I mean, I would think they're as good as any. The program, the school is. What else do you want? You're in the Big Ten. I mean, it's not like, well, I got to go to another level. There's no other level to go to except you want to be an NFL coach, correct?
Yeah, and I've not heard any, rumblings about that.
Not yet.
Pop up on like watch lists, right? Not yet, for sure.
Not yet. Yeah,
that's the PTSD where it's like, well, you never know. At one great season and things could change. But he is a guy with young kids. He just seems really well grounded. And has a big picture perspective. I think he does appreciate, again, I think our athletic director here, Rob Mullins, has earned the respect that he has. And, he's in a position where I think Dan Lanning can look at the athletic director he has in place, the key boosters he has in place, starting with Phil and Penny Knight, and say, the leadership here is as good as it can possibly be. I don't want to take that for granted, and it seems like he's not taking that for granted. Oregon fans are over the moon with him right now.
All right. Well, we'll end here with Brian McMeet saying "SCO." What is that? Is that an Oregon thing? SCO.
Yeah, SCO.
That's okay. See, I don't get that here on the East Coast, but you guys know what that means. Anyway, Rob, I appreciate it as always. Again, if anybody out there is an Oregon fan that doesn't know where to check out Oregon Ducks content, go to goducks.com, and we'll definitely be looking forward to speaking to you hopefully during the season, Rob.
Absolutely. Anytime. I really appreciate it.
And we appreciate having you. Thanks a lot. And we'll hopefully talk to you during a very successful season.
Yeah, hopefully we earn the right for me to make another appearance here.
Oh, you already got that. So